So workers in Haiti have taken to the streets over the last couple of weeks to protest the mass exploitation of their labor that has taken place largely at the hands of U.S. multinational corporations who have been making billions and billions of dollars in profits off of the backs of the Haitian people. So I wanted to show you guys what some of these protests have been looking like on the ground, and then we'll get into a little bit of what their actual demands are right now, and then a little bit of the history of U.S. imperialism that has created the conditions that allowed for this type of exploitation to exist in the first place. So first here, just to start us off, from Madame Boukman, she points out that the Haiti sweatshop uprising continues. These workers are packed in factories where they sew tens of thousands of garments daily for $4. For American retailers such as Walmart, Target, JCPenney, Gap, and Canada's Gildan Activewear, they're finally saying enough is enough. So let's just go ahead and check in with what the energy is looking like on the ground. Right, so you guys get the picture. This has been, again, over successive weeks now, we've been seeing these types of protests. We're talking about thousands and thousands of people that are fed up with the exploitation and are basically trying to demand some very, simple concessions here from these factories that they are operating within. We're talking about basic living standards for these people that are putting in hours and hours and hours of labor that they are essentially barely even breaking even when it comes to what they're taking home after transportation costs and after cost of living adjustments, etc. They're basically being paid substandard wages, or you could even call them like slave wages, because they're basically being paid next to nothing, and that's again largely being driven by U.S. corporations and unfair trade deals that we have levied against the country of Haiti for years now. So let's just go ahead and check in with what some of the demands are and how these protests started to unfold. So here from the World Socialist website, they say thousands of garment workers in Haiti's capital city, Port-au-Prince, continued their demonstrations Thursday following several weeks of strikes and protests demanding livable wages and an end to the super exploitative conditions at the hands of U.S.-based clothing retailers. The citywide eruption of protests, uninterrupted even in the face of mounting police brutality, is an indication of growing working-class opposition to the regime headed by Prime Minister Ariel Henry and backed by U.S. corporations. And they continue saying protests first arose in late January as videos circulating on social media showed workers in Caracol, Northern Industrial Park in Haiti, a major industrial hub employing upwards of 60,000 workers, and workers had been forced to labor in sweatshop conditions 9 hours a day for a daily wage of just $4, and police immediately responded to the walkout with brutal aggression. And they say union leader Dominique Saint-Eloy, sorry if I'm butchering that name, who is also a coordinator for the National Union of Haitian Workers, told Reuters in a telephone interview that workers are seeking to raise their daily wages to approximately 1,500 gourds, which is roughly $15 US per day. Okay, again, recognize that as we are in the United States right now, fighting for a $15 per hour minimum wage, and even that would barely be a living wage in certain parts of the United States. These people are literally asking for $15 per day. Again, $15 per day from corporations that are based here in the United States that are currently reporting record profits. Okay, so again, just measly crumbs that we are talking about here, just basically trying to guarantee a minimal, a bare subsistence level of wages. So they say raising it to $15, roughly US dollars per day, from an appalling current 500 gourd, which is roughly $5 per day. And he says, quote, with 500 gourds per day without any government subsidies, we cannot meet our needs while the price of basic goods transport costs have increased. And they say Haiti has for decades been a haven for American apparel manufacturing companies to generate super profits from operating massive sweatshops where workers are not paid enough to eat 3 meals per day. And the destitution and exploitation of Haiti's textile and garment workers can be traced back to the early 1990s when the United Nations and the Organization of American States declared a trade embargo of Haiti, but still granted concessions to U.S. companies to reap booming profits from the impoverished workforce. And they say more than 60 U.S. corporations are involved in shipping a torrent of goods intended for assembly into Haiti and then re-importing the assembled products back into the United States. And among the traded products are toys, fishing lures, cord, clay floor tiles, brooms, baseballs, softballs, pajamas, pants, and t-shirts. And the corporations received incentives offered under the Caribbean Basin Initiative, the U.S.-based program to promote economic development in the Caribbean Basin, and the Generalized System of Preferences, the GSP, which allows goods from developing countries to enter the United States tax-free. So in other words, we allow our US-based corporations, instead of employing and creating jobs here domestically in the United States, we basically sign absurd trade deals after destabilizing countries like we have done extensively in Haiti. You know, we try to install governments that are more favorable towards US multinational capitalist interests, and then we turn around and we give them these absurd trade deals that allow those corporations to go in, basically do mass exploitation of the domestic population's labor, and make billions of dollars by exporting the products of that exploited labor back here to the United States to sell cheap commodities to the American people. So it's like a double whammy here where, yes, you're getting cheaper products imported here off the backs of essentially slave labor or damn near slave labor, but on the back end of that, the consequences of that basically are that U.S. Jobs are not being created in many of these sectors. This is, you know, not unique to Haiti. This is what we've seen as a product of all of these types of trade deals like NAFTA that have seen our jobs exported to Mexico, exported to China, where again, these multinational US corporations are allowed to just go around the world to whatever fucking countries they want and basically utilize the exploitation of labor to make billions and billions of dollars off of the backs of these workers. So just a little bit more context in terms of the imperialist actions of the United States, specifically under the Obama administration in setting up some of these conditions. They say here from Left Voice that the poverty wages paid to textile and assembly workers in Haiti is no accident. It has deep roots in imperialism, and the complex at the center of today's strikes is one of several administered by the government agency Société Nationale des Parcs Industriels. Sorry if I completely butchered that, but again, SONPI basically, which are duty-free zones created to enforce the country's tiered wage system. And though textile workers in Haiti actually fall within the highest tier of the country's minimum wage protections, companies that contract piecework specifically for export are allowed to pay workers 10% less, and this is a legacy of the HOPE and HOPE 2 Acts passed by Congress in 2006 and 2008 during earlier periods of labor unrest in Haiti. And to preempt the Haitian Congress's attempts to raise the minimum wage, the HOPE treaties imposed a US-backed package of trade liberalization allowing for extremely modest gradual increases in the minimum wage in exchange for duty-free export of textiles. And they say leaked cables from WikiLeaks show how Hillary Clinton's State Department and the US Embassy under Obama leaned on the Haitian government directly on behalf of the companies whose profits rest on cheap Haitian labor. And they say back in 2008, when the Haitian Congress attempted an ambitious minimum wage increase, a study from the Workers' Rights Consortium showed that a wage of 550 HTG was needed just to cover the daily living expenses of a family of three. Okay, 550, but thanks to US intervention, the wage rose only slightly from roughly 22 US cents to 31 US cents, rather than almost tripling to 62 US cents as the government originally proposed. And more recently, a 2019 report by Solidarity Center estimated that a reasonable living wage would be 4 times higher, since workers typically spend more than half of a current day's earnings on just lunch and transportation. So again, they're going to work for like $4 a day, and half of that is going towards just food and transportation for that day. So they're really making almost nothing at all at the end of the day. But they say modest increases have been made since the report, but they are far outpaced by inflation, and the workers' demand today, a daily minimum of 1,500 HTG, is still well below the 1,750 called for in that report. So in other words, even what they are asking for right now, these modest crumbs that they're asking for right now, roughly $15 per day for backbreaking labor to produce these textiles that are then sold at Walmart and JCPenney and all of these other stores cheaply here in the United States. Even these crumbs that they are asking for would not even be enough to be living wages for these workers, okay? Kind of the same dynamic, obviously very different degrees here, but kind of the same dynamic of what we're talking about here domestically in the United States, right? We are fighting for a $15 minimum wage, right? $15 per hour, not $15 per day as they are, but even the $15 per hour that we are fighting for here in the United States would not be enough enough to be considered a living wage in almost the entirety of the United States. So, this is the reality of capitalism, both domestically and in an international sense. When you give these corporations the ability to write a lot of these free trade deals, which essentially are just the freedom for US corporations to go exploit cheap labor wherever the fuck they want around the world, when you allow these corporations to set the standards of these trade deals to exploit all of this labor overseas, yes, you might get some cheaper goods here imported to the United States, but you're also killing US jobs, and you are also, basically getting those cheap goods here on the backs of what are essentially slaves to US multinational corporations. So, I 100% support this strike. Obviously, don't even think that needs to be said. And, hopefully the Haitian people, especially with the turmoil surrounding the assassination of their former president, the refusal of their current president to step down after his term was supposed to end on February 7th. So, given the conditions that Haiti is facing domestically right now, this is coming at a really important time. But, obviously, hopefully they can overthrow the corruption within their government domestically, and also try to boot out a lot of these U.S. corporations that are continuing to essentially impoverish this nation. Because, you can talk about them providing jobs to the Haitian people, but what they're basically doing is looting the Haitian people, because these workers are the ones who are producing the value for billion-dollar corporations like Walmart and JCPenney and the other corporations they mentioned here. They are the ones that are actually providing the value for those companies, and basically these companies are looting these countries, keeping them impoverished, and continuing this cycle of globalization and neoliberalism that is incredibly destructive, both on a domestic sense and also in an international sense.